It was a sweltering Saturday afternoon in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Fairview Heights, Texas. The sun hung high in the sky, its scorching rays casting shimmering reflections on the community pool, which glistened like a sapphire gem under its relentless heat. The smell of fresh grass and sizzling burgers filled the air, mingling with the occasional distant laughter of children as they played on the nearby swings. The scene could have been plucked from any picturesque neighborhood. Clean, calm, and perfectly idyllic. Fairview Heights was the kind of place where everything appeared pristine, almost too perfect. It had neatly manicured lawns, streets lined with towering oak trees, and houses that seemed plucked from a design magazine. The quiet hum of suburban life went uninterrupted, or so it seemed, on this particular afternoon. However, the carefully constructed peace of the town was about to crack. The community pool, which was usually the hub of summer relaxation, became the unlikely setting for a confrontation that would resonate throughout the entire neighborhood. At the far end of the pool, near the shallow steps, floated a woman whose calm presence contrasted sharply with the growing tension around her. Her name was Maya Johnson, a 41-year-old African-American woman who possessed an unshakable quiet strength. Her skin, kissed by the summer sun, gleamed a warm bronze. Maya's braided hair was pulled back in a knot, and she wore a modest black swimsuit, floating peacefully on her back, eyes closed, as the water gently rocked her. To any onlooker, Maya seemed just like anyone else at the pool, a woman unwinding after a busy week. But what no one knew, and what Maya had chosen to keep hidden, was that she was Fairview Heights' newly appointed police chief, the first African-American woman to hold such a position in the town's history. She hadn't announced her new role with any fanfare, preferring instead to settle into the community without drawing attention to herself. She had bought a modest house on Elmwood Drive, paid for her community pool membership like any other resident, and simply wanted to enjoy a quiet afternoon before the duties of her new position took over her life. Maya had always believed in showing up as a neighbor first, not as a leader. She was here to be seen as someone just like everyone else, not as the police chief. She believed that by establishing herself this way, the community would come to know her for who she truly was before they knew her title. But on this sweltering afternoon, the quiet peace she sought was about to be shattered. At the far side of the pool, under the shade of an oversized umbrella, sat Claudia Thompson, a 48-year-old woman with a sharp, assessing gaze. Claudia, the president of the neighborhood's HOA, prided herself on keeping the community proper and safe. She had a reputation for being the unofficial gatekeeper of Fairview Heights, scrutinizing every newcomer, ensuring they adhered to the unwritten rules she had set in her mind. Her platinum blonde hair was perfectly styled, and her lip gloss was always fresh. She watched as Maya floated in the water, her eyes narrowing with a growing sense of unease. Claudia had never seen Maya before, and that was exactly the problem. To her, any unfamiliar face at the pool was a potential threat, someone who didn't belong. This woman floating in the water was an outsider, perhaps a guest, or worse, someone who had slipped in without permission. It didn't matter that Maya was a member of the community, paying her dues like everyone else. To Claudia, it was about control, about maintaining the order she believed the community needed. Maya, however, was unaware of the scrutiny that Claudia had already placed on her. She closed her eyes, letting the water support her, allowing herself to float away from the stress that constantly followed her in her new role. The pool was the one place where she didn't have to think about the judgments or the assumptions others had about her, where she could just be herself, away from the weight of her badge. But that peace was fleeting. Claudia, with all the self-appointed authority she believed she held, stood up abruptly, adjusting her large sunglasses. The sound of her flip-flops echoed across the pavement as she approached the pool's shallow end, where Maya floated in serene oblivion. Maya heard the footsteps before she saw the woman, and she slowly opened her eyes, planting her feet on the pool's bottom and rising to her full height. Water streamed down her arms and from her braids as she turned to face Claudia, who now stood at the edge of the pool, looking down at her. "Excuse me," Claudia began, her tone sharp, as she removed her sunglasses with a practiced air of authority. "I haven't seen you around here before. Are you a member?" Maya's voice was calm, but There was an undeniable weight behind it. Yes, I am, she replied evenly. I moved to Elmwood Drive a couple of weeks ago. Claudia's eyes narrowed as she processed the response. Elmwood Drive, she repeated, a note of disbelief in her voice. I know nearly everyone on that street. No one mentioned a new neighbor. I have my membership card with me, Maya offered, keeping her tone neutral. She didn't want to escalate the situation, but she could already feel the tension growing. Claudia let out a short, tight laugh. If you don't mind, she said, with a thin smile. I'd like to see it. It's important to make sure everyone follows the rules. Maya stood still, allowing the moment to breathe before responding. I told you, I'm a resident. I live here, and I pay dues like everyone else. Claudia's eyes flickered with irritation. I don't think you understand the situation, she said, raising her voice just enough to be heard by the nearby families lounging by the pool. If you won't leave, I'll have to call the police. Maya's heart sank, but it wasn't out of fear. It was out of disbelief. The line had been crossed. A confrontation that started over a simple membership card was now escalating into something much more dangerous. She could have pulled out her badge right then and there, but something inside her said to wait. Let Claudia go as far as she needed to go, and see what the truth revealed about the system Maya was about to lead. The sirens were already on the horizon. What would come next was something no one could have anticipated. The tension in the pool area escalated rapidly. Claudia, standing with her arms crossed and a self-satisfied smirk on her face, had already dialed the police. The sound of the phone call was almost surreal, the calmness of her voice contrasting sharply with the storm brewing on the poolside. Maya stood her ground in the shallow water, her stance firm. Though her mind was racing, she could feel the eyes of the other residents on her, their silent judgment hanging in the air. Some pretended not to notice, their heads buried in books or smartphones. Others, mostly older residents, who knew Claudia, watched with a growing unease. The whole scene was absurd, but Maya knew better than to react. She had lived through similar moments before, when people like Claudia looked at her and assumed that her presence was something that needed to be justified. I'm not leaving, Maya said, her voice calm but with an unmistakable firmness. I have every right to be here. Claudia's face flushed with indignation, her lips pressing into a thin line as she tried to rally the crowd. This pool is for residents, she repeated loudly, her voice now sharp and accusing. Not guests who don't belong. The word guests felt like a slap, a weapon meant to dehumanize Maya and strip her of her dignity. Maya paused for a moment, her hands still wet, water dripping down her arms, as she stared at Claudia. Her silence was deliberate. She could have easily revealed herself as the town's police chief, a move that would have ended this absurd confrontation in an instant. But Maya knew that doing so would only reinforce the very thing she'd been fighting against. This unspoken assumption that her worth, her authority, was tied to her title and her badge. This was bigger than just a neighborhood pool incident. It was about belonging. It was about respect. I told you, Maya said, her voice unwavering. I'm a resident. I pay dues, just like you. Claudia, now growing visibly frustrated, turned slightly toward the other poolgoers, hoping for a validation, some sign that her actions were justified. But the people she glanced toward either avoided her gaze or shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One woman pretended to adjust her sunglasses, and a man reading a book deliberately turned the pages with exaggerated slowness. No one intervened, but no one supported Claudia either. Maya remained calm, her eyes locked on Claudia's. She had been through enough similar situations to know when it was better to stand firm in her silence, allowing the other person to dig their own hole. And Claudia was digging deeper with every passing second. Without saying another word, Claudia pulled out her phone, her fingers tapping the screen with an air of finality. Fine, she huffed. I'm calling the police. The words hit Maya like a cold splash of water. The absurdity of it all. The fact that she, a resident of Fairview Heights, was being treated like an intruder in her own community made her chest tighten, but she didn't flinch. This wasn't just about a pool membership. It was about the systemic biases and the unspoken rules that had governed communities like Riverglade for far too long. As Claudia spoke to the dispatcher on the phone, Maya stood there, soaked in sunlight, the tension between her and Claudia palpable. She could hear the lie forming on Claudia's lips. Something about aggression, about trespassing. But Maya said nothing. There was nothing to say. She simply waited, her mind racing through the years of experiences that had prepared her for moments like this. Yeah, I need the police at the Riverglade Community Pool, Claudia said, her voice loud and forceful. There's a woman here refusing to leave. She's being aggressive, possibly trespassing. Maya stood still, her body poised, her expression unreadable. She had worked hard to gain the trust of the community and the police force. She had spent years bridging gaps between law enforcement and the people she served. But today, on her day off, in her own neighborhood, she was now the target of everything she had fought against. She wasn't afraid, not even close, but she was deeply disappointed. Claudia, once she finished the call, slipped her phone into her bag with an air of triumph. They'll be here soon, she said, her voice smug. Maya didn't say a word. She just stared at her, allowing the silence to settle over them like a blanket. She had been silent in moments of injustice before, allowing people to reveal themselves for who they truly were. And that's exactly what was happening now. Claudia was so wrapped up in her own assumptions that she couldn't see how absurd she looked. She couldn't understand the power Maya wielded. No badge, no uniform, just the truth standing in front of her. Maya wasn't going anywhere, and Claudia didn't have the authority to make her leave. I'll wait, Maya finally said, her voice calm and steady. Let's see how this plays out. The air grew thicker as the minutes dragged on. The sound of the faint sirens in the distance became louder, signaling the arrival of the police. Maya could feel the eyes of the pool's patrons on her, their curiosity palpable. Some shifted nervously in their seats. A mother pulled her child away from the shallow end. It was the kind of discomfort that made everyone shift uncomfortably, wondering if they should intervene, but not knowing how. Soon, the faint sound of a cruiser rolling into the parking lot became unmistakable. The police were here. The officers, unaware of the true nature of the call, pulled into the small parking lot and parked with quiet efficiency. The officers, Brooks and Ruiz, emerged from their cruiser, muttering to each other as they approached the pool gate. They had responded to what seemed like a low-priority call. Nothing violent, nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. In their minds, it was just another poolside drama. Officer Ruiz adjusted the radio as they walked toward the entrance. Another one of these. Huh, she said, a hint of sarcasm in her voice. Must be a slow day. Brooks nodded in agreement. Yeah, let's keep it simple. Talk to both sides. No need to escalate anything. They walked through the chain link gate and were greeted by the sight of Claudia standing stiffly with her arms crossed, and Maya standing calmly in the shallow end of the pool. The contrast between the two women was stark. Claudia's rigid posture was that of someone who felt entitled to control the situation, while Maya's calm demeanor radiated strength and confidence. Officers, Claudia called out, pointing dramatically toward Maya. That's her. She refuses to leave. She's trespassing. I've asked her politely, but she got aggressive. Maya could feel the weight of the false accusation settle in the air like a storm cloud, but she didn't react. Instead, she let the officers do their jobs, knowing that the truth would eventually come to light. Officer Brooks exchanged a look with Ruiz before stepping forward. Ma'am, he said to Maya in a neutral tone, we received a call about a possible trespasser. Are you a member of this pool? Maya nodded without hesitation. Yes, I am. My bag is on the second lounger. You're welcome to check my membership card. Officer Ruiz walked over to the chair where Maya's bag sat, unzipped it, and pulled out the laminated membership card. She examined it carefully, checking the barcode, then showed it to Brooks. Everything checked out. No red flags. No discrepancies. The card was legitimate. Everything looks good, Ruiz said, glancing at Brooks. Claudia's face twisted in frustration as she sputtered. That could be someone else's bag. You never know. Ruiz raised an eyebrow, skepticism creeping into her expression. Ma'am, the ID matches the name on the card. There's no reason to believe it's fraudulent. Claudia's eyes flared with irritation, but Maya remained unruffled, her gaze steady. It was clear to Ruiz that this wasn't a simple case of a membership issue. It was something more. Maya could feel the shift in the air as Officer Brooks turned to face her. His eyes were now more focused, more respectful. As he regarded her with a newfound awareness, he seemed to pause, his gaze narrowing slightly, as though something clicked in his mind. Ma'am, he said slowly, would you mind verifying one more thing for me? Maya nodded, her movements deliberate but calm. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thin black wallet. From it, she produced her police badge and ID card, holding them up for the officers to see. The words were unmistakable. Chief Maya Johnson, Fairview Heights Police Department. For a long moment, the air was still. Ruiz blinked in surprise. Brooks looked between the badge and Maya's face, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Wait a minute," he muttered. "You're the chief." Maya nodded. "Yes, I'm the new police chief here, and I'm also a resident of this community, just like everyone else." Claudia's face drained of color, and her mouth fell open as she stammered, I didn't know. If I had known." Maya didn't let her finish. "And that's the problem," she said, her voice measured and firm. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with decency." The weight of the situation hung heavily in the air. Maya stood with quiet dignity, her badge now in full view, her presence undeniable. But the moment wasn't over yet, and it was clear that Claudia, despite the revelation, was still grappling with the consequences of her assumptions. Claudia's face was pale, her lips trembling with a mixture of disbelief and regret. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to be confronted with the truth of who Maya was. And in that moment, her carefully constructed narrative had crumbled. Claudia backed away slightly, looking like a deer caught in headlights. Her fingers fumbled at the strap of her beach bag, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. "I didn't mean any harm," Claudia stammered, her voice shaky now. I thought you didn't belong." Maya didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. The truth of the moment was speaking louder than any words could. Claudia, despite her supposed role as a self-appointed gatekeeper of the community, had failed to see Maya for who she truly was: a resident, a leader, a human being. Instead, she had viewed Maya through the lens of her own biases, assuming that because Maya was unfamiliar to her, she didn't belong. Officer Ruiz stepped forward, her face still a mask of professionalism, but with a distinct shift in her demeanor. "Ma'am," she said, addressing Claudia, "the police were called over a situation that was based on an assumption. Everything checks out here. This is a misunderstanding." Claudia's eyes flitted nervously between Maya and the officers, as if seeking a way out. I didn't mean to cause a scene," she mumbled, her voice barely audible now. Brooks, who had been silent through most of the exchange, stepped closer to the two women. "We're going to have to follow protocol," he said, though his tone had softened. He turned to Maya, offering a small, respectful nod. "Chief Carter, we apologize for the confusion. Thank you for your patience." Maya gave a slight nod in return, but didn't speak. She wasn't angry, at least not in the way one might expect. Anger would have been easy to feel. Instead, she was just tired. Tired of the assumption, tired of always having to prove herself. But she was also resolute. This wasn't just about a pool membership. This wasn't just about one woman's mistake. It was about the larger, deeper issue that had been buried beneath the surface of Fairview Heights for far too long. The officers lingered for a few moments, ensuring that the situation had de-escalated. The tension in the air didn't dissipate immediately. It hung there, thick and uncomfortable. People at the pool began to shuffle, pretending to go back to their activities. But the ripple of what had just transpired was undeniable. "Claudia," Maya finally said, her voice quiet but firm, "I'm not here to fight with you, but what happened here today? It's a reflection of something much bigger. You didn't see me as a resident. You didn't see me as a neighbor. You saw me as a threat because I didn't fit the picture you had in your mind of who belongs here. And that's not something I'm going to let go." Claudia flinched at the words, but Maya wasn't finished. "You're right about one thing," Maya continued, her gaze unwavering. "This was a misunderstanding, but it's also a lesson. It's a lesson for all of us about who we allow in, about who gets to take up space without having to justify themselves. I'm not here to make you feel bad about what happened, but I am here to make sure this doesn't happen again. To me, or anyone else." The words hung in the air like a weight, and for a long moment, there was silence. The other pool-goers, who had been pretending not to pay attention, could no longer ignore the truth of the situation. The shame was palpable, but so was the understanding that something had changed here today. Riverglade's carefully curated image of peace was beginning to crack, revealing the underlying assumptions that had been allowed to fester for far too long. Maya turned away from Claudia, walking back toward her towel, but not before she caught the eye of Officer Brooks. "You did the right thing," Maya said quietly, her voice sincere. "You verified the truth. That's what matters." Brooks nodded. "We're just here to do our job," he replied, though there was a trace of respect in his voice now. It was clear that the entire interaction had shifted his perspective. The pool slowly returned to normal. the laughter of children, and the sound of splashing water filling the air again. But the atmosphere was different now. There was a quiet undercurrent of realization, of people beginning to see the cracks in the facade they had built. It wasn't just about who belonged at the pool. It was about who belonged in this community. And for the first time in a long time, the question of belonging had been raised. The aftermath of the poolside confrontation wasn't over. But for Maya, it had been an important step forward. The rest of the day unfolded without further incident, though the story of what had happened at the pool spread quickly through the community. It wasn't long before whispers began to circulate, and before the evening was out, a video clip of the incident, captured by a bystander, was circulating on social media. The video, shaky but clear, showed Claudia pointing toward Maya, demanding that she leave the pool, and then the police arriving to verify Maya's identity. It was a simple clip, but it quickly gained traction, shared by local residents, activists, and even parenting groups who were appalled by what had transpired. The narrative was clear. A white woman, wielding the power of assumption and privilege, had tried to force out a woman who not only belonged, but had been quietly leading the very community Claudia had attempted to control. By the time the sun set, the video had gone viral, and Riverglade's seemingly idyllic neighborhood was now the center of a conversation about race, privilege, and belonging. Claudia, who had once held the reins of power in the neighborhood, now found herself in the uncomfortable spotlight. Her phone buzzed nonstop with notifications, texts from friends, colleagues, and even family members, all questioning her actions. Some tried to defend her, while others were less forgiving. In the quiet hours of the night, Claudia sat alone, staring at the phone in her hands, trying to process the storm that had just begun to swirl around her. Meanwhile, Maya didn't let the noise distract her. The truth had been revealed, and that was all that mattered. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more moments like this, more misunderstandings, more challenges to face. But for once, Maya felt the weight of the world begin to shift. She wasn't just a police chief. She wasn't just a black woman leading in a predominantly white town. She was a catalyst for change, and she was ready to see it through. In the weeks that followed the confrontation at the pool, the town of Riverglade slowly started to change. The video of the incident, posted online, sparked a firestorm of discussion, not just within the town, but beyond it. The story of the police chief being falsely accused, of a woman who believed she had the right to control the community based on her own assumptions, became a focal point for a larger conversation about race, privilege, and the systems that have long allowed inequality to persist. Maya, although deeply affected by the incident, chose not to dwell on the negativity. She focused on what was important, her community and the people she served. The next few days at the police department were filled with long meetings, conversations with community leaders, and reflections on how to move forward. Her office, which once felt like a place of authority, now felt more like a place of responsibility. Maya had always believed that being a leader meant more than just wearing a badge. It meant showing up when it mattered, standing firm in the face of adversity, and being the kind of person others could trust and look up to. In Riverglade, the conversation about respect, inclusion, and accountability continued. It wasn't just a one-time issue, it was a turning point. The video spread, and as it did, it ignited discussions that were long overdue. People who had once remained silent began to speak up, sharing their own stories of feeling out of place or judged based on assumptions. These stories, some painful, some uncomfortable, began to build the foundation for a more inclusive community. Claudia, too, found herself changed by the events. The days after the confrontation were filled with uncertainty and regret. She spent hours reflecting on what she had done, and slowly, she began to understand the depth of her actions. She enrolled in a local course on implicit bias and started attending workshops on equity and inclusion. She met with Maya, not as a gatekeeper, but as someone seeking guidance on how to do better. Slowly, Claudia began to see the world through a different lens, acknowledging her past mistakes and taking responsibility for the harm she had caused. The town's HOA board, which had once been a place of quiet control, now opened its doors to more voices. They held community meetings where everyone, regardless of race or background, could speak freely about their concerns. The neighborhood, which had been known for its perfection, now began to embrace its imperfections, understanding that growth often requires discomfort and hard conversations. The lesson learned was clear. Respect and dignity aren't privileges earned by title or position. They are human rights that everyone deserves, regardless of background or appearance. For Maya, the most important change wasn't the one that had occurred in Claudia or the community. It was the change that had happened inside herself. The calm, composed woman who had walked into the pool that afternoon wasn't the same woman who walked out of it. She had been tested, but instead of breaking under the pressure, she stood tall, not just for herself, but for those who often went unheard. In that moment, Maya realized that leadership wasn't just about making decisions. It was about being the kind of person who inspired change through action by setting an example and showing others the way. The lesson. The events at the pool were a reminder that change often begins with small, seemingly insignificant moments, a confrontation, a misunderstanding, a misjudgment. These can all lead to greater understanding if we are open to learning from them. But it takes courage to stand firm in the face of adversity, and it takes humility to admit when we are wrong. True growth comes from recognizing our biases, challenging them, and striving to do better every day. Advice for all. Speak up for what's right. Don't be afraid to stand up when you see injustice. Even if it's uncomfortable, change starts with one person making a stand. Lead with empathy. Whether you're a leader or not, treat others with respect, regardless of their background. Empathy opens doors and builds bridges. Be open to change. Growth requires the ability to accept that we are not always right. Embrace opportunities to learn and better yourself. Every experience is a chance to improve. Acknowledge mistakes. It's easy to become defensive, especially when we've been wrong, but owning up to our mistakes is how we grow, learn, and build trust. Be patient with the process. Change doesn't happen overnight. Be patient, not just with others, but with yourself. True transformation is a slow and deliberate process. With the fall leaves beginning to change colors in Riverglade, the neighborhood now looked different. There was a new sense of awareness, a quiet but firm understanding that the community needed to be built on more than just perfect lawns and pristine streets. It needed to be built on respect, compassion, and, most importantly, honesty. Maya stood in the midst of it all, knowing that the work was far from over. But for the first time, she felt like she was part of something much bigger than herself, and that was just the beginning.